discussed, again, we're talking about the Yom Kippur War and the difference between the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. And Rabbi Friedlander was giving this speech to the yeshiva of Panovich Yeshiva in real time during the war. And as we discussed last night, one of the important things he noted is not to, buy into the fact that what you read in the news and what you think are the facts are going to happen. And there's a danger in believing that if I read the newspaper, the Egyptian front is doing this, or the Syrian front is doing this, or the Russians giving these weapons, that you could actually believe that the Yom Kippur War, quite frankly, from the Jewish perspective, it could be a war in Asia or Africa or South America or North America. It would be the same thing, even if it didn't apply to one Jew. Hashem would be determining the war, and to read in the newspapers and to presuppose and assume anything. Again, Hashem has people. Let's put it this way: if Hashem gives a person an IQ, a high IQ, well, that person may be a vehicle, a vessel to do great accomplishments or terrible accomplishments. That person was given an IQ as a tool. He didn't choose that IQ. Same thing with height, charisma, being the ability to write or to speak. All of these things, Hashem puts certain people in certain times, certain places. Actually, just was reading about someone called the Yanuka. This past week's Mishpacha, and this person was a child prodigy and lives in Israel, and he has thousands of followers, many thousands of followers. All he does is teach Torah. That's all. He doesn't have nothing more. Followers meaning they go to learn Torah, Gemara by this individual. And he knows Kol HaTorah Kula. Apparently, he knows. He's 32, 33. Knows Kol HaTorah Kula. He did not grow up. He grew up in a religious family, but not necessarily a rabbinic family. He was the only child. The parents for many years they were not able to have a child. And this person, actually, in his youth, his parents had lots of problems, and he traveled Europe, around the world, and he never spoke the language of his countries. All he would do is go to the synagogues and learn all day, this kid. And today, he is this amazing, one-of-a-kind young Torah scholar. So this person, obviously, Hashem, in a certain way, he was, like all of us, we're all put in certain time, certain place to do things. Now, could Hashem change our deck of cards at any moment? Of course it could. At any moment, things could change. And therefore, when we're reading the news, and he was from the 73 war, it's the Yom Kippur War, but it's just as applicable, just as germane today. I would say it's even more germane today, because our news is, in those days didn't have the radio, but it was delayed. What happened in both the Six-Day War and the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War, is amazingly, the Egyptians and the Syrians were able to feed their populations complete fake news. Now we talk about fake news, to say, if you would have heard Egyptian radio on the second day of the Six-Day War, Egypt was bombing Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Their fake news even helped encourage Jordan to enter into the Six-Day War. That can never happen today. In our day, first of all, everything is immediate. It's on social media. There's all kind. Every phone has a camera. Every person's texting or messaging. I mean, the news today and the cycle. I mean, you can sit on Google News all day and all night, and hear people's opinions and analysis. I mean, there's and within minutes, it's out there. And a person, whether it's COVID, whether it's the both the protests, peaceful protests, the race issues, and the awful thugs and riots led by criminals, and all those are true today. And you could have everyone's opinion, and like they know what the future is going to bring, and they know what the political impact. So we live in a world today where we could buy into this is the reality. First of all, we mentioned it's heretical, and we discussed it at length the past two Shiurim, that to take Hashem out of the picture. It's all political figures and people and things which God's totally out. And you and I, by the way, we're just pawns. Then we're not. There's nothing we can do. We live in a generation where just we're hopeless, and just the winds of fate have put us in this situation. So it takes away divine providence for the nation and for individuals. But if only this person be the president, but if only this police officer, but if only there would be a Martin Luther King today, but if only there'd be, everyone has right now there's Hashem, and for wherever the world has to be, same thing with the meat markets and COVID and science and everything else, or the economy going back, et cetera, et cetera. It's heretical to think that everything you really know is that you can know everything that's going on. And as I mentioned, when I started this last week, nobody thought about riots or that the fact that the army tonight, they have the army in Maryland ready to go into Washington, D.C. I mean, talking about like real military to go into. I mean, that's like, who would have thought that we'd have a curfew here? I mean, again, the curfew in San Jose, we're very fortunate, really is very little relatively going on. But there's a curfew here. I mean, all of this, it's something that's unpredictable. So it's a level of kfir, and also it takes away our ability to pray, because if I can't and you can't change anything, so why pray, right? And if you do pray, it's half-hearted, as opposed to, as I discussed, I'm not going to repeat everything, that a person, they know that their prayer, their good deeds, tips the scale, changes the reality. And that's certainly the history of the Jewish people. I mentioned the whole story about the Briskerov, and when he was in Europe when the World War II started, and he was in Israel when one of the greatest upsets of World War II by Al Alamein, when the Brits beat both Montgomery, Rommel in Egypt before they conquered Israel, would have conquered Israel, or at the time Palestine, Jewish Palestine, all of the prayers and how he said it made a difference. Right? If we think everything is set because the Egyptian army or the Syrian army in this war, or the political figures, or the COVID realities in our day and time, then not only does it border on heresy, take God out of the picture completely, but it also it disempowers any ability of us to change our fate and our reality. That's as individuals, and as I mentioned, actually, let me pick up where I left off. That Yanuka, I mentioned, here was a young boy, almost, and they're describing, by the way, this boy, his grandmother had cried for years and said to tell him every day that her daughter should have a son, or her son should have a son, actually, the boy's mother, and how the name was picked, and the whole story. It's like, the boy's a Yemenite, from the Yemenite background, which is, and there's a million things that go into it. So you'd say, wow, look at this divine providence. This person was really picked. And to an extent, there are certain people that have the potential more on a platter. That means there's more potential that's there. It doesn't mean this kid could have made poor decisions and ended up not a Moshe Rabbeinu, but a Korach, or a Yeravam, right? The Bible, the Torah, always has big people. Some do great things and some do awful things. They use their potential l'ra for bad. You can be brilliant. There's so much, unfortunately, today, so many brilliant Jewish minds, but they're, due to most of them having no background and no true education, they use those minds sometimes for some terrible things, or sometimes just, it doesn't, for accomplishments in secular fields, which have really, which is fine, but it's temporal and not eternal. And so you can have all the potential in the world, but there are also people who aren't like that. I remember Rav Shach, who was the greatest gadol in Israel about 20, 30 years ago. So I remember by his hesped when I was learning the Lakewood Yeshiva at the time, BMJ, and I think it was Shmuel Bermel Yeshiva Mir Brooklyn eulogized him when he passed away. It was 2001 when I was there. I think Shach was like 106 years old at the time. And in 2001, I think he had about 700,000 people at his funeral. It was a Friday. There would have been more, and it was done within a few hours. and they had to end the funeral early because of Shabbos. It was in the winter. So there's 700,000 people plus on very short notice, so that a few hours of him passing away, and it was a Friday. So like the next week they had Hesped, the eulogies of Shmuel Bar Mama. I'm pretty sure it's him. If not, it was Rabbi Vachtfeld, the Rosh Hashiva. He said the following thing. He said, Shach learned in Lithuania by the great Rabbi Aaron Kotler, the founder of the great Shiva. And Rabbi Aaron Kotler, as a kid, now he was a child prodigy, but he had, he lost his father, he had church test, but he was a child prodigy. At the age of 13, they were predicting him to be the next Gadol Hador. And that's what he was. He ended up being this great Gadol. He had tremendous potential. He actually, when his father passed away, his older sister, who had become secular in the early 1900, not the early the turn of the century. So she pushed him to get a PhD in math, and she was his older sister, and she really pushed him, so much so that the Rosh Hashiva of Slobodka banned all letters to him. He didn't let the letters be delivered from his sister to Rabbi Aaron Kotler because he was worried that she would convince him to leave yeshiva. But Rabbi Aaron Kotler was just genius, and he had his tests and challenges, but he ended up following predictions that people said he could be great. He said about Shach, as a kid, nobody looked at him as anything but average. No one thought he would be anything great, tremendous Torah scholar. He was viewed as an average kid. And he said that Rav Shach was a person through prayer and persevering who became this great gadol. If you and I believe that we're just like, I'm born to this kind of family, or I can't do this, or this is just, I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time, we settle. And we don't push ourselves because it kind of steals our free will to do anything. Whether it be anti-Semitism today, Jewish assimilation today, if we feel helpless, then we won't do anything. Or if we do, it'll be half-hearted with the belief that you can change the world. And therefore, he said that you have to, the second reason. The third reason, as he pointed out, it's not just a fear. The main purpose of mitzvahs, of Torah, is to get a person to constantly see God in this world, and you'll be missing the main purpose of Torah. That's what we discussed the past 2 nights. Then he says the following thing, referring again to the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War, and again, we discussed at length why the Yom Kippur War had to happen. What went wrong? The Jewish people, this great 6-day war, from predictions of total genocide to outstanding military success, and a failure really to transform Israel and to see God in it, but rather to put our belief in an army or in tanks, and how the Yom Kippur War flipped all that because we had to be bailed out by Kissinger and by Nixon, and the first 2 days of the war we almost got destroyed. They said the following thing: the Yom Kippur War started on Yom Kippur, which is a day of rachamim b'din, of mercy and din. The fact that the war started on Yom Kippur, Hashem did this with his tremendous mercy and kindness, with us and for our own good. This day of Yom Kippur, of all days, if the war would have started on Tisha B'Av, they really would have been smart, the Egyptians. They would have done the war on Tisha B'Av in the Syrians. But they did it in Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a day. If you had to pick the most merciful day of the year, it's Yom Kippur. Here we're about to get the ultimate lesson on Yom Kippur, which is the ultimate day of mercy, more than any other day of the year. V'im ken, hadina kasha shaba alinu be'ez hazu, even though, for reasons we discussed at length, based on our own, limited understanding of reasons why on a spiritual level Yom Kippur War is necessary, it was still tempered by a day of tremendous rachamim, tremendous mercy. And it was not for naught. This war did not start on a regular day, but it was a day where it's in a rachamim, a regular day, maybe we would have this mercy, but we have Yom Kippur, and that was a big blessing because if it was on another day, our situation could have been much more dangerous and challenging. Certainly, it threw off the Yom Kippur. I remember when I was living in Philadelphia for a few years, the mashgiach of the Rabbi Golumbik was a mashgiach of the Philadelphia yeshiva, which is arguably the best yeshiva high school and base measures for younger Bachrim in America. So he told me he was in Bnei Brak by the Yom Kippur War, and he remembers that Rabbi Vosner, one of the senior sages, him going out on Yom Kippur with his talis and telling the soldiers, go, 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 go. Don't worry about the fast. Go, break your fast. Go to the, or depending on the situation, go to the front, take off, just get into the cars, get into the Jeep, go. I mean, this great sage making sure that everyone knew, get into the cars. You need to get to the front. Actually, again, I spoke 2 years ago on Yom Kippur about the Yom Kippur War. But no, you go out. Sure, it's stirred the people's Yom Kippur. There are much lesser things that can bother somebody on Yom Kippur. Going out to a war front is not exactly Ne'ilah or Kol Nidre or Musaf on Yom Kippur. So, at some level, you'd say, oh, well, look what I did to Yom Kippur. They threw them off. They weren't, but Aval he l'chardar habir l'charda amuka shetotzia his chas betikva bitachon beYeshuas Hashem sheba li de bitu b'tfilah b'kavana amuka first. But at the other level, what it did is it caused first of all those who are staying behind to have a Yom Kippur like no other. V'hashpia l'tov, and even those going on the vans, anything they would have done, praying to God, this on Yom Kippur had tremendous effect. And he said, as he points out a fact that we all know, that Yom Kippur in Israel, even the Hamoinim, the masses of people who don't typically come to a basic Knesset during the year, it made them as well look to get close to Hashem Yom Kippur. There are many Jews who have that spark deeply buried due to many years of lack of education and not connecting to Hashem, mostly due to decisions of people many generations before them. But they come Yom Kippur, especially in Israel, and they may go there and be typically just go to shul, not fully grasping, just to know a Jewish go to shul on Yom Kippur. But that year, many of them felt closer to Hashem than ever before. Than ever before. And he says the following thing: this lecture was given a few days after Sukkot. And he says, and the war went over Sukkot. Actually, we know that the contours of the war would change on Sukkot. It went from a losing war to miraculously, as Sukkot went on, the whole situation changed on the ground for the Jewish people in Israel. Sukkot are days of Simcha Shel Mitzvah. The whole essence of Sukkot are days of Simcha Shel Mitzvah, Kehillas Hashem, and closest to Hashem. We know that the Talmud says, in general, every single year of every generation, we are judged on Sukkot. The Talmud says, also in Rosh Hashanah, in the 4 times in the year, the world is judged. Pesach on Tefillah, Pesach on the produce, on Atzeres, on Shavuos, on the fruits. That's why I bring the first fruits. Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Hashanah, Kol Baye, Ha'olam Oivim in front of a Gemara. We know on Rosh Hashanah we go in front of Hashem, but like one at a time, like sheep. And I've discussed that over the years on Rosh Hashanah. With Echad, and on Sukkot we're judged on water, on life. The Talmud, why? Interestingly, says our Friedlander, why does Hashem judge us specifically on the holidays? Right, the 4 times a year that we are judged are on the holidays, on the Yom Tovim. Why are those times? Are they days of judgment? Really, Sukkot is a day of joy. Shavuos, we were judged on Shavuos just this past weekend on certain elements on our Torah. By the way, it's what the Shlomo brings up. But the Talmud says specifically on certain other things. He says it's actually Chazdei Hashem. It's the kindnesses of God. Shebahem, on those days, on the holidays, we're taken away from all of our typical things that consume us. I remember very vividly when I was a kid. This must be close to 30, at least 30 years ago. I was a teenager, and it was Sukkot. I was sitting in shul, not far from you. It was like one of these guys who, at the time, he actually since then became more observant. At the time, he was, not so into things, and I would talk in shul very often. I don't think he went to weekday minyan. That type of person comes in shul on Saturday, comes up late, shoots with his friends, makes a few l'chaims. Not a particularly inspired guy, and he was reading Kehillas. He was reading the art scroll Kehillas, and I see him say that, and I realized as a young person, and it stayed with me many years later. Even then, I chopped. This is a guy who was you wouldn't call him spiritual, but I was like, wow, this is like really deep stuff and transformative. And this guy was into business, and I thought to myself then that this guy, if he would read Kehillas any day of the year, he would not be open to it. He wouldn't first of all, he wouldn't read it. He wouldn't sit down. He wouldn't think about it. Today he would have been on an iPhone all day long, checking his texts and emails and WhatsApp, whatever, every millisecond, and probably the headpiece and talking all day in business. He wouldn't have the bandwidth to think about it. He wouldn't think about it for 1 second. I remember thinking, I was like, this guy couldn't believe it. Like the guy you don't expect. Wow, this is deep stuff. Kehillas. King Solomon, the accessories, however they say it. Really deep stuff. And he was moved by it. Well, that really is for all of us. Yom Tov allows us to, all of us, not just an individual who typically is caught up. I know myself, I'm sure yourself, same thing. Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're caught up, but Yom Tov in particular, that's why Ashkenazim have all these Megillas we read, and we do extra tefillas. It's a time where we're able to be separated from all the material things which typically distract us from this world, right? The average person today, unfortunately, I talk about God, even if they believe, they don't do it because they're just so distracted by life. It's not that they're bad people per se. They're just totally consumed by life. There was an Israeli singer 2 weeks ago who was defending the Haredim in Israel. Very famous guy. His name was Aviv Geffen. I never heard him, Baruch Hashem, sing, but I got sent this clip by a few people. This Aviv Geffen, who was actually a leftist, very, very popular Israeli singer for about 20 years. So he was saying, leave the Haredim alone. Like, leave them. Why are you attacking them? It was amazing to me. He said, my God is Google. And their God is a Torah. So he says it. This is Aviv Geffen. Actually, since he actually said this, he had a lot of people contact him, which actually a chus for him, because he publicly, this super leftist Chiloni rock star, being very vocal. He was bothered by all of the irrational anti-Haredi press in Israel. So he said he actually was contacting so much people. He first closer now. His son this summer is turning bar mitzvah. He's going to go and he's going to give him an aliyah because he thinks it's important, even though he's an atheist. This guy's but he's funny. I thought his God is Google. And he may have said it that way. And someone else said, no, I believe in God. But the average person, their head is much more on the internet or in sports or about their job or getting their ice cream than Hashem. That's the average person in the world. And even by Torah Jews who are fortunate that Torah mitzvahs make us more attuned with emes, with truth, and what this world is really about. But still, all of us, we have jobs and we do have emails and we have all kinds of bills to pay and things to do. And we can easily lose focus. In Yom Tov, We're asukim and mitzvah. We're doing mitzvah. We're shaking a lulav. We're sitting in a sukkah. We're surrounded by a sukkah. We're eating matzah. We're staying up all night learning Torah on Shavuos. The kruvim yoyisel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And since we're so close, we're not consumed at work. We're not in a cubicle or in our office or on the phone talking to people. On Yom Tov, we're talking to God, or singing Zemiras, or we're doing actual Chefza Shal Mitzvah. They're twofold. Number one, that we think more about Hashem, or more cognizant of Hashem. It's more transformative periods. And number two, that's where Zuchuyas Misrabas, we have much more merits. We're much more involved. Barachamim Goyvrim. And there's a lot of rachamim. And those are the times where God judges us. God judges us when we're at our best. When we're in the best part of Hashem's mercy. When does He judge the Jewish people? When does He judge us? When we are in our prime. When we're literally at our best moments. We're most focused in Torah and mitzvahs. That's the time of year where God judges. That's an act of mercy. There should be more reason. We should have more going for us. Lezakas, in order to be meritorious in judgment. And that's why this war, which was a wake-up call, we're put in during these days, and in Sukkot, when the mime is matuach aleinu b'Echad, that we have Shemaim, we're literally covered by the sukkah. And Hashem's, the sukkah, of course, representative of Hashem's surrounding us. And the Daled Minim on the four species of the lulav and esrog, and the Sifsei Chaim, Yaginu Aleinu, all of these things were there for our protection. And again, I encourage anyone who's interested to look at the war itself. The war, we went into Sukkot still on the down, albeit that we got some bearings. But over Sukkot, literally the 8 days of Sukkot, the whole entire war shifted from we were on the defense. By the end of the war, we started to be on the offense, and shortly after, they surrounded the Third Army. They broke through the Syrian lines, and were marching towards Damascus. And the entire war changed over those days of Sukkot. Says it, there's Lazakas, the Yeshua, all this was that we should merit more spiritual salvation. Now, can you imagine if you be a person reading a newspaper, right? A person reading a newspaper, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, whatever it would have been in 1973 on Yud Beis Tishrei, 2 days after Yom Kippur. Wow, bad news for the Jews. Israel, tragedy. You're sitting there, people eating and talking, doesn't look too good. What's going to happen? And you're just looking at this war from afar, and wow, this is tragic. Wow, no hope, this and that. What would you do? I mean, when you believe like things are stuck, it literally becomes paralyzing. And besides not seeing Hashem, it becomes, and anyone who studies Jewish history, knows that in many of the, again, we're not Hashem, we don't know everything well, but you can see the salvation of Hashem, the worst periods of time, like things flip in a moment, and it's not. With all of the cheshbonis of the Egyptians, it's like the Purim story. Haman picks Adar because of Moshe Rabbeinu's death. But he didn't also chap it was Moshe Rabbeinu's birth and what Adar represents. Like the Egyptians picked Yom Kippur for one day, and really it ended up on a spiritual level being, what they thought was a day of Jewish weakness was the greatest day of Jewish spiritual strength. This is the following thing. Haraya Chushis. He says, you should know, by the way, that emotional proof is even more important, this is actually a deep concept, than something cerebral, which but it's in the cerebral. It's in the world of intellect. He's talking about this speech was given 17 days after Yom Kippur, towards the end of the active war. As I mentioned before, these discussions, they would still be on the war front for many, many more weeks, although the active war stopped a few days later. So in either case, we should imagine we're still in Yom Kippur, this yeshiva. Right? Imagine right now, Bachrim, we're still in Yom Kippur, and it's no longer Ne'ilah. You know, I don't like to repeat ideas. I repeat ideas, but same content in drasha. Like I did with 13 years, I had very little. I did repeat here and there, but very, very, very rarely. The only time I really repeat something is Ne'ilah, although I do change what I say a little bit. But I always say the same thing every year in Ne'ilah, part of it. So I can make it, half of my Ne'ilah speech is there, and the other half I will switch. And the night of Rosh Hashanah, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, about taking advantage of Rosh Hashanah. Why do I do that? Because I look at Ne'ilah as this moment of, my goal in Ne'ilah is not cerebral at all. When I say that this is the most important hour and 15 minutes of the year, and I always read the Chofetz Chaim, always read his words. If not now, when I look at it as like a pep talk of pep talks. This is a time you just got to push yourself. This is a time, and that's not, when typically you want to, when a rabbi wants to speak, you want to change the way people think. It's not about the emotion of the moment. It's about let's change and transform our life for today and tomorrow, and work on ourselves and have new ideas, in a deeper vision of ourselves and the world. But by Ne'ilah, that's not the point. Ne'ilah is, and I know Ne'ilah is right now. We need to savor this moment. We need to chaparayim. We need to take advantage. If not now, when? If we don't push ourselves now by Ne'ilah, where the entire Yom Kippur is going to be sealed, then we're going to miss the boat. It's like the train is leaving. Right? The gates of heaven are closing, as we say in Ne'ilah itself, in the last service of Yom Kippur. So he says, imagine right now we're still in Yom Kippur. And it's these moments that we know are going to give the spiritual potential for the year. Now, what we do the rest of the year, the permutations of everything is Yom Kippur. Of course, whether I pray today or tomorrow give charity, it will affect things because the possibilities are all inside Yom Kippur, which means it could be Yom Kippur as we make 50,000, 500,000, 200,000, 110,000, 300,000, 45,000, right? I don't know that right now. It could be supposed to be super healthy, cautious, but whatever it possible. If on Yom Kippur it says we're not going to make more than $250,000, then no matter what a person does, he'll make it with the prayer and with the going to school and going for the best job interview, have best link to that won't make a difference. Whatever Yom Kippur decides, that's the possibilities. That's the possibilities. Who you'll meet, what you'll do. I mentioned where you'll end up. All that's aside. This is the moment to do it. So he says, imagine right now we're still in that moment. It's no longer Ne'ilah. And Din Shemaim is Mamshech. And the Din Shemaim is Mamshech v'chol yom oila al kapas maznayim. And right now, every day, it's deciding who will live and who will die. Who will live physically and who will die physically. That's what happens in war. There are always casualties of war. And spiritually, who miya yichem umiyamos. And again, when I look at our own time, certainly when the challenge of COVID has been physical health and besides the mental health, which is also, but spiritual people have done extraordinarily well, and there have been people who have spiritually collapsed and regressed. Matzav zeh, this situation, he says the truth is, when we're in a situation of war, when we're deciding the spiritual status of the Jewish people, and there is an active war going on, Jewish boys are on the front line. As I mentioned yesterday, that one of the reasons they couldn't pull back the troops, even after the peace treaty was signed, is because they refused to pull back until they got the hundreds of, I think thousands between the Syrian and the Egyptian border, of Israeli soldiers who were POWs. Now, we know what happens with the Jewish POW. They had taken, in the beginning of the war, hundreds on the Egyptian border. They surrounded these lone soldiers and just took them prisoner. I mean, people don't realize that because we got these soldiers back. It took weeks, mamish weeks of action and diplomacy and threats to get all these soldiers back. Well, their lives were being judged at that moment, donned on that moment. It's literally life and death, and the circumstances of how the war ended. He said to them, we're still in a status of judgment. And what you and I do, not just Kissinger and Nixon and and Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan and Abba Eban, they're not going. Menachem Begin was a side player at that point. A few years later, he'd be the main player. Right? These are not the people they're going to have. They're put in the places, but the deck of cards will come from Hashem. By the way, Watergate, as this is going on, is it escalating? I mean, the whole thing is so surreal. From year to year, you know, the truth is the purpose of Elul before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is that we should realize the period of judgment. And if we think now of what war means and who's in the dangers of this, and the dead, there's almost 3,000 people that got killed in the Yom Kippur War, many more injured. At the time that they're speaking, there were definitely many hundreds, if not thousands, at this time of Jewish POWs. It should be in all of our hearts, all of our souls. And so therefore, we need to look at it as right now that the period of judgment is going to be going on. I think I'm going to hold here because the next paragraph is a little bit long, but I think that's certainly in our own case, when we're in a situation when the world looks like it is and the news is a certain way, you know, it's a reminder for us ourselves that, and I mentioned this morning by telling we have, and I believe that those who are saying to them here have a big schus that our own community, Hashem's mercy, has been spared from the from COVID, and many of these again, the peaceful protests are fine and certainly it has a good place. But the rioting and the thugs and the criminal behavior of groups which are actually have damaged the Jewish community both in Los Angeles and New York, to a smaller extent, places like Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland, we're been spared from that. What we're sitting here, we're not supposed to just go to sleep and say, okay, life is good for me. I know we've all been affected, been cooped up, and have those who have children. It's been very challenging, and we've been nervous for their loved ones because of the potential. But largely, we've been, with tremendous mercy, spared. I believe that only makes us more obligated to pick up our game, to do on our service of Hashem. As a shul opens now, there's a certain normalcy, and it should be. Minyan is the norm, and that's the way it should be. But I wrote this in the article I wrote a few weeks ago. We should be coming out of, and we're far from done of COVID and the other parts of these unfortunate things surrounding both the unfortunate death of an innocent man, and as well as people's anxieties about being treated differently based on their color, which are legitimate, as well as the terrible response and damaging response of some of the people fighting were much worse. Just last night in Oakland, four people in Oakland were killed last night. 5 police cops were shot around the country last night. These people and those who are supporting are murderers and damaging, and they're quite frankly, in my opinion, they damage their own cause, the cause that they supposedly espouse. The rabble-rousers, the Antifas, the criminals, etc. But all of this most likely will go on from some period of time, even if it simmers down, because there are people who have a vested interest politically to causes. And I don't think there's a Martin Luther King today, unfortunately, who's going to try to do it in the best way, nor does the president help very often as well. I might have to do a political take. What I'm really here is to say, the normalcy that we go back to, it's still Yom Kippur for all of us. we're in this situation as well. COVID come back, and come back with a vengeance in theory, even though the predictions here and there, we don't know. Nobody really knows. Nobody knows. If I listen to this guy, Dr. Fauci, every day is a different story. I don't have a clear story from him, which tells me I'm not blaming him. He doesn't know. Only Hashem knows. So I just very briefly, I do believe we should not lose our focus that we're still Yom Kippur, but as we do go back, and the world is going back by necessity and because it should to a level of return to the shul, we should be coming back to change people and remind ourselves that this should have been transformative for all of us. And any adjustments we have made should, obviously going back to if you're a minion, it's different davening by yourself. There are differences, but the good that we have benefited from, the Amunah, the Bitachon, that should be a permanent transformation. We'll pick up tomorrow, and he's going to continue with this idea of realizing because there's Hashem in this world, and because of Bitachon, and because our actions make a difference, what they should be thinking if it's really still Yom Kippur while a war is going on, if it's really that for us today when there are riots in Washington, D.C. across the street from the White House, or COVID, which is really right now, Baruch Hashem, largely contained. Largely, New York has 40 cases yesterday out of 8 million people. That's crazy. They had thousands and many thousands of cases a day coming out at one point. But there's no, and I'm not saying to scare anybody. I'm just saying, just to remind yourself, there's no guarantee this doesn't come back harder. And therefore, Mirza Hashem, it won't come back, and we will have a vaccine very soon, and we'll have Yeshuas. But to remind ourselves that we still need to realize that there's a lot at stake, and that you and I have a lot, how we do, and our prayers don't sell yourself or myself short. What we do will and does make a difference, and it may make the difference. Okay, we'll hold it. You were all unmuted. I wish everyone a good night, and we'll pick up with the Tom tomorrow. There'll be a share in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow night. Okay? Good night, everybody.
Good night, Rabbi.
Lila told we missed Tackle. We missed you. It's been a little bit.
Good to be back.
Good to have you back. Okay. Have a good night.
Good night.